Frank, over to you, the history of varroa in New Zealand.
Yeah, okay, the picture, that's 3 founderous varroa in a drone cell, and you can see all the guano. When you're opening up a cell or looking down into a cell when you've got varroa, you'll actually see the white where they come from. So you're looking at the neuter young ones, and there's a little male in there. You just where your pointer is, just yes, little tiny male. So just letting you know, this is what you often find anyway. This used to be my hives. This was slightly pre-varroa. And you can see I was a commercial beekeeper, and bees don't care what sort of box they put in. The one with the J431 down at the bottom, that box is 40 years old. You can see the corners, and that's how they used to come out years ago. They were all interlock corners. So that bee box was 40 years old when it was sitting there, and this was the 2000s. So we've been around for a little while. They made them out of pellets, really. I was just getting pellets, and a lot of them are 3-ply sides and wooden ends. And that's how I used to beekeep, and we've got good honey flows. Most of my hives had 2 queens. I bred them naturally. I looked for that. So when you found a hive with 2 queens in it, both laying through the summer, you breed from those, and I gradually bred more and more, so you got good production. What I used to do, I moved the top boxes back a little bit for an extra entrance, but you can see some of these are opened up, especially above that J431, the corner there is opened up. These are the extra entrances. I didn't mind that at all because they were collecting a lot of propolis, and they would gunk that up with propolis, and propolis was $400 a kilo at that stage. I didn't mind these extra entrances, but when you get varroa, you can't have extra entrances. So this is taking a bit of honey off at that stage. That's why the bees are all over the place. But you can see the extra entrances on the hive to the left anyway, where they're coming out. This is bush sites, and this is where I used to have my bees. I didn't really cut the grass when we started moving to regional parks. I cut the grass, and you'd often find people having a picnic in your bee site when you wanted to start working. But they moved out luckily. Disastrous day. Varroa discovers on April 11th in South Auckland. 3 different beekeepers, 2 hobbyists and a commercial beekeeper, found the pest on the same day and took it into Dispersal, the beekeeping supplies. Trevor Cullen identified, because he's got books there and whatnot, and rang the Auxiliary helpline. And of course, that's meant 24 hours a day. You then, because of something serious, put you through to somebody who knows, and then full scale happens. The area where it was found was a container terminal. Take them off the wharf and then take them to container distribution centres. And there's also a queen breeder in the area. Ministry of Agri and Fisheries, which we called MAF in those days, thought the beekeeper may have imported a queen with varroa, and we thought because we've had some containers come in with bees on it and they've been stopped, that it might have come in with feral hive. Queen beater had a heart attack a few months later, so that was the end of that sort of discussion. So a stop still notice came over the radio. I was coming home about 7:30. It was dark. Well, it might have been a lot later than that because I think during the summer it's a bit later. I tend to work till about 9 o'clock. When it gets dark, you start coming home. The lights behind me flashed up and down immediately after the notices on national radio. When I got home, which was about 20 minutes later, the police were there to meet me. And they said, "You've got to go back." And I said, "No." And we had a little bit of discussion, showed them the load, no bees. Ministry of Ag do a delimiting survey. In other words, they keep going out until they find no mites. And so they're identifying the infestation area. The mite levels are very high where that's been found, and they reckon it would probably been there 2 years or more. At the time, a lot of commercial beekeepers were burning their hives because they thought they had AFB. This is a photograph that I took of PMS, which is Parasitic Mite Syndrome. And you can see 2 of the mites sitting in the top of cells. But what happens with the hive when it really gets bad is that new larvae coming on have been fed on by mites. They can't produce enough royal jelly to feed the next lot generation, and gradually the hive goes down, and you get things like the curled up in the middle top there, curled up larva that's not being fed properly. You can see other ones are small and they start dying in the cells, and they thought, oh, they got AFB, so they started burning these hives. And of course it was PMS, so they didn't really know that. That's something that happens when varroa mites get really out of control. And at that stage, your hive was probably about 2 weeks before being dead. Shows the red dots where they found it. So it was really spread around Auckland, down into the Thames area. It had even gone to the Bay of Plenty and then further down into the Waikato, which is the bottom ones, but up north had gone right up there as well. So beekeepers move hives around. And so commercial beekeepers' hives were in the zone were giving free treatments, but the hobbyists not. One of the hobbyists in Auckland was doing daily mite counts. So he was doing a little bit of science. He got rejected for treatment when he asked for it. I sort of intervened and made a few phone calls, and he got his mite treatment. I continued extracting, keeping in touch with the national beekeepers, because I was secretary of the Southern North Island branch. After 4 weeks of varroa spread to the Bay of Plenty, they knew it was gone. There's a big debate in the industry whether we should eradicate or not. And the kiwi fruit industry weren't very happy at all because they wanted bees for the coming season. And so I think the government saw the light and there was no eradication, so it was out of the picture. This is Paul's graphs, and you can see from the top graph how through June to August, how the varroa mite was expanding. It was doubling every 3 to 4 weeks, just by looking at the drop on the bottom of his boards. You only find that the actual weak ones are dropping or the old ones are dropping. So there's 70 to 80% of mites are in the cells all the time and reproducing. And so it gives you an idea. When they got this Apistan, you could see the drop. So it came down, you had 6,000 mites or something like that. Looking at the lower drop when it came down, and after 14 days, which is one generation, you can see it just dropped off like mad. So this mite drop was quite alarming, 1,500 in a day sometimes in the first couple of days. So that's how well the actual miticide worked. And you can look at that at your leisure, but each 12 days, but 13 days is okay. Depends on how many mites go into the cells, how much brood you've got. A lot of it's focusing on drone brood, but they also go into worker brood at the same time, as long as they get the trigger, the smell, just as the first dose through a molt. There's a 24-hour period where the skin is very tender, so the mite comes out from underneath the liquid that the bee's feeding, punches into the thing, and that's the feeding hole that remains there. Just on that one, he reckoned there was 23,000 mites in that hive. So the maximum they've found at Ruakura was 43,000 mites treated in the hive lived. Anyway, branch representatives got together at Rotorua and we decided he wouldn't accept anything at all. We had an agreement, really. We just put the maps out on the floor, and I got which beekeeper looks in this area, and 2 of them, and they drew a line where they wanted to fit it, and they actually signed it. I got them to sign it so they couldn't say that I didn't agree with this part of the line. And we made that through the line, and it basically followed our boundary, which is good. We've got beekeepers who are south of the boundary, and we had beekeepers from our area north of the boundary. So they basically swapped apiaries, and everybody was fairly happy. Well, that's what I thought they were anyway. MAF had only set up a barrier with 5 kilometres between it, and really the northern beekeepers, they went on the top of the valley at the other side, and bees just moved across the area, so the boundary was quite useless, and it didn't really last very long. The green dots at the top were all the beekeepers' apiaries in that area. That picture there on that side there, you can see there's a bump in the line. That line used to go straight across, but because of sabotage and whatnot, they dropped the line down a little bit. That's what was happening as they were finding varroa. And the other one, it was close up looking at the line. So your purple are the original ones that they found, and then the red ones are the next year, and the actual yellow ones after that. It goes into a spread mode. The bottom looks like it could have been a log at that stage. That's when I got varroa. The log came down through the island, dropping mites. Yeah, mine's the bottom one there, right down the bottom. That was me. And so a log came right down from the North Island and dumped into a mill at that area. It was only a small feral hive, but it had about a dozen drones in it, and it had mites, and that's another story. Like in Australia at the moment, they're instituting training courses. Really should go to those as much as possible. Probably mightn't mean anything to you yet. You won't take it all in until you actually get mites. And then no varroa detect in the South Island. And so they instituted a line across the middle of Cook Strait. And at the ferry terminal, groups of beekeepers volunteered to put our jackets on and talk to every car and everything to make sure there's no bees coming backwards and forwards. That was the main thing. There was lots of meetings going on during this period, and I was appointed as a representative to oversee the movement control permits. When the bees were meant to go into pollination, they were meant to be treated 30 days beforehand. And you're going to face that area now when everybody goes into the almond pollination. If they don't have strips in them, it's going to be the biggest spreading event you can ever know, because it only takes one mite, and of course they're already mated, so that it's on its movement. So but nobody was really policing it. Apiary advisory officers, one was in Fiji, others were doing something else. So they really weren't policing of what was going on. And we just sort of pulled our hair out and said, well, that's how it goes. In 2002, we had a bit of sabotage. It was going on all the time, really. Because the middle of the North Island is a big Manuka area, beekeepers were unhappy about being shut out of there. There was a lot of intimidation going on. Somebody moved varroa, and every apiary you could see going down the road, they threw mites into. So they must have come a long way to get such a lot of mites. They went down the valley, and luckily it was Tweedale's hives, so he moved all the hives that could be seen from the road back up in the north line where his brother was, who started looking after the hives. So that sort of delayed it a little bit. So this is us at the wharves. So that's what we were doing for about 3 weeks, just to making sure that nobody was going across the line. Sometimes there was the MPI staff there, but most of the time they're just volunteers. So in 2003, a later vlog that came down through the middle of the North Island to a sawmill in Patanui with a feral hive in it. It was able to fly for 3 days. It was here for a week before it was destroyed. Varroa got out. Stop still notice was put on me. While they did a delimiting survey, they had a 5K radius around the mill, which included about 3 or 4 of my apiaries. MAF treated my hives and left me to it. The permit conditions that I had to gas the loads with methyl bromide before we moved out of the area. There was house movements all over the place. Houses can have beehives in them and logs, so they instituted that anybody moving those sort of things, the loads had to be inspected. Looking at the photograph, you can see the spot where the mill is, and the yellow dots really were where my hives were, and they got varroa, and I'll explain it. And the red dot, of course, was the next year. So under a stop still notice, which lasted about three weeks or 4 weeks, I decided to see if I could restrict the movement of varroa by killing all the feral hives in the area. Now, the area that I thought was a poor area turned out to have feral hives everywhere. It was first settled more than about 150 years ago, so a lot of the trees were really old, willows, poplars, microcarpus, that sort of thing. Good area, and they had a lot of English trees where it was settled, you see. I did a letter drop to all the houses in the area, so that took me a couple of days to do that. And then said, you know, anybody find him gets a pot of honey. So the children were out all over the place, and we found them in drums and fields and church walls and trees, and they were all over the place, these ferals. In fact, some of them were only about 50 meters apart going down the road. So anyway, I decided to track the ferals with a primus and wax capping. I actually put this information back to their DPI and said, this is how I got around it. I know that we had a trial many years ago. They actually tried this out to see whether it would work. And they used the Hamner Valley where there wasn't a commercial beekeeper. So they put some hives out there and then poisoned them and see how they lasted. They lasted about an hour after the poisoning, and they came back a year later, put some new nukes in to see how they would fare, and they were dead in an hour as well, because they found the feral hives out there still, and they still were laced with poison, and they died as well. So it took a couple of years for that area to become free so they could put bees back in there again. So I moved down the road every 500 meters, set up my little primus, and it was robbing season. It was April, May. And so that it was basically bees smell it and they were coming in. They were all black bees mostly. All our bees in those cases, like yours, are quite black, and the mellifera crosses. Some of my hives, a lot of them at that stage were in that area were yellow bees, because I've been requeening. So we would go down the road. If I couldn't spot them, I would put the poison out and attract them in. And then as soon as the bees turned yellow, whoops, that's my bee. She took it away again. Then I moved further down. I had to do some poisoning. I was finding the hives and sealing them in with foam, but I couldn't get into one place. He was a known cannabis grower, big dogs and everything. You could see the bees in his chimney from the road. And I said, can I just go and get there? No, you're not allowed on the property. So that's where I started baiting. They were dead within half an hour. I was also at the same time, I was actually beelining. And if you know anything about beelining, you need a stopwatch and coloured pens. And as the bee starts feeding, you just put a little mark on the back, a little paint on the back. Your stopwatch takes so many minutes to fly back, drop off and come back again. And from that, you can work out how far away they were. And most of them within a kilometre. At some stages, I had them going in 4 different directions. So there was quite a lot of ferals around. Hollow trees, willow trees were the worst. When a willow tree grows, its branches snap off. Where the branch was becomes a hole. And I'd go back, seal up the tree, and they'd find another entrance. I'd go back and seal those ones up. So you sealed 3 or 4 of those up. And they just kept coming out. And sometimes I went back 3 or 4 times to fix it before you could seal them in. I was deciding to seal them in rather than poison them, because if you made a mistake and you didn't get the entrance correctly, another bees would rob it out and that'd be mine. So microcappa trees, most of them 100 years old, and they were only 50 metres apart. In the end, we just put the primus up and you could walk down the road and see the bees coming to meet you. And then we just climbed trees and put foam in them. Bees coming out of the stump, but it must have been okay down there. And this is me sealing up a microcarpa tree, the big split in it, and the bees were in that. We had permission to go to most things. They knew what we were doing. There was quite a lot of publicity around, so I was allowed to go onto properties and do that sort of thing. So the stop still notice was lifted after 3 weeks, which means I continued to work with restrictions. We had to use methyl bromide, which a lot of beekeepers were using at that stage, so we weren't allowed to spread it if we were in an area where it was restricted. It's pretty dangerous stuff. You're not allowed to wear gumboots because it's a heavy and air gas. And if it gets into your boots, it'll take your skin off your legs. So we, as farmers, had a right to use this gas at this stage. You needed scales, and because you wanted to only put a certain amount in, you worked out the square footage of your load. You put in so much gas for that, and I also had to heat it up to get the gas. When it gets down, the gas bottles get down a bit. They're a bit slow at coming out. So if you pour boiling water into it, it comes out a lot quicker. And you can just measure your scales. We're putting about half a kilo in, or 300 grams sometimes. That was basically it. I left the load covered for 12 hours. Before you leave, you make sure there's nothing on your grill, nothing in your cab, and then you could move out. Some of the beekeepers couldn't be bothered with the scales and all that sort of thing, and they would just give it a shot for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then when they got home, they'd take the load off, and quite a few of them went, because it does hit you quite well. I was fairly careful and didn't lose any skin, and it was great for wax moth control when just do a container. Commercial beekeepers were losing hives. This is the 3rd year, of course. Found at one stage Apivar was not working. So when we started treating with Apivar, because you had to change the chemical family, we treat them twice a year, so each one you change. So they put in Apivar at the end of the season, which was quite late, so the numbers were high. But in those days, the polymer took 3 weeks before the strip became effective. And so a lot of beekeepers lost a lot of hives. We brought the scientist out there and he told us to get best kill after 12 weeks, but it's only registered for 8. We said, oh yeah, we did that because to match with all the other strips, but you've got to wait the 3 weeks before you can get you another 8 weeks. Started bringing hives up from the South Island to meet pollination agreements and everything else, and this allowed a lot of older beekeepers in the industry to exit the industry with some money. So this is my little yote and my crane I had at that stage, which is just a T-bar one, but it worked quite well with a little winch under it, just a hand control. And you can see I've got my scales and my bucket and the gas in it and a gas mask as well. You've got to be really careful. And as you can see, it's pretty dry. It was a dry summer, which made killing the bees quite easy because there wasn't much floral sources around. I was appointed representative on a couple of panels. And one was the compensation claims, because under the Biosecurity Act, if you're ordered to destroy things or anything like that, or it stops down notice, you actually can claim compensation. So compensation was payable during the stop down notice. If you'd lost honey or if you lost your area, we worked out how much it was worth. A lot of beekeepers had to buy new gear at some stage because they were losing it. So we worked out the losses. And one beekeeper was denied because he moved his hives into the control area. We moved them out of control area into a free zone and then claimed it, and he was denied because if you break the rules, you weren't allowed. We generally did the claims looking at the cost. Nobody really disputed when we gave it. Sometimes we gave more back than what they'd asked for because their calculations were wrong. We weren't over generous and we weren't under generous either. That took 2 years, this meeting every month. So in 2007, it spread to the South Island. At the port, quite often you'd find a bee stuck in the radiator of a truck, and we used to check the big trucks just for that reason, because bees will sometimes stick on the outside of a vehicle and they'll stay there, and then once they warm up again, they'll fly off. Don't know how it got to the South Island, but Nelson's a camping area, and so you never know. So they did a standstill and a delimiting survey there. They'd saved $7 million by a tax on farmers actually to pay for it, because all the farmers and fruit growers, they were going to lose their free pollination when you got varroa. MEF, when they go into that sort of thing, everybody in the office switches on to this fund, you see. 3 weeks it was gone, and they'd hardly accomplished anything. They just did the delimiting survey, and 3 weeks it was gone. We were over EAS at this time in the USA and got a call from Nelson Beekeepers, about 4 of them over about 3 or 4 days. And what did you do to control feral hives? And fipronil was legal for that use because it wasn't registered for that use. And I put MPI in there, but it should be MEF. So beekeepers did 2 valleys to the west, blocked up their hives, and then went through and poisoned the ferals out. Certainly worked, but it went the other way. And also one of the beekeepers, when he heard there was varroa in there, he moved his hives out illegally. They got them and put them back, but you never know whether the mites of them moved out or not. A year later, the MEF officials were asking us, what did we do? You know, that was so successful in stopping it and whatnot in one direction. And we really couldn't tell them because of fear for prosecution, because you don't know whether they're being friendly or not. So as you can see, how varroa spreads. On its own, it spreads 35k a year. On a vehicle, it goes at 100k an hour. So it doesn't take much to spread. So you can see it moved down from the original dots and whatnot where they were. It moved down to the line, and beekeepers were just moving them across the line as quickly as they could. And it only took roughly 4 years to spread right through the North Island. And the 6th year it got into the Nelson, and you can see some of the dots where it spread after that. And it gradually moved down the South Island. What sort of shocked me is right down in Dunedin, there was some varroa found there. I'm not sure whether that was queens coming down from somewhere else, you never know. And Chatham Islands is free, still is free. And we've got some offshore islands up Great Barrier Island, and Stewart Island is still free of varroa as well, because there's no domestic hives there. Although in Great Barrier Island, there's the commercial beekeepers and whatnot, but they haven't allowed any bees to go in and out there. They've policed it themselves, so they're practically free of varroa, where they think anyway. So what we've observed over the next few years, varroa moves about 35k on its own. We thought the mites would spread through the valleys. That's what I thought, you know, as it came down through Parasitic, I'm right, I'm on the other side of the hill. But in fact, when they were found in Tawa, they were also found in the valleys right over the hills. So drones fly over top of hills if the wind allows them to, so they spread. Drones will normally fly 12 to 14k or even further if they want to. I lost my mellifera dark bees. I'd been breeding them for long years. A dark bee, they stung quite a bit, but they would fly right through the winter. 8 degrees, our bees were flying quite well. They really produced well, but yeah, they did sting you a bit. It only took 2 years. I put them further out than I thought. I thought they'd be safe out there, and my breeding stock disappeared real quick. I left a couple of feral hives in apiary, 100 metres away from my apiary, and I just watched what had happened and everything. And basically, I found that keep treating properly, take the treatment out after 8 weeks, and generally somewhere during the winter, that hive would die. My bees would rob it out. By the time I got back in the spring, all the hives were dead. Just progresses really, really quickly. So you can't just go away and leave your bees in the winter now. And that's what you hobbyists will find when you really get varroa. You'll be having to look at them once a month. Beekeepers and drones are the main spreader of mites. You don't really know that spreading it goes. And that's why I put at the bottom, one feral can take down 16 hives in an apiary just by the robbing. We can prevent some of that by putting robbing screens on, but you can't stop your bees robbing something else. I had a look what round, and DEFRA is the English math sort of thing. And they had a design of a bottom board there made out of 2x2s. So I bought a lot of timber, which was everlasting timber, they said it was. And it's only been done, what, now 24 years, and it's still going well. A few staples don't last that long because they rust out, but everything else is going well. So I use a core flute sheet at the bottom, blocked it all off, and there was a gap of about 1 inch with a drop below. So generally, they don't crawl back up. And this is the mite fall you get after doing a treatment. And of course, you get all the rubbish dropping at the bottom of the hive as well. But you can see the mites, and the mites actually glisten in the sun. If you've got the sun, you just hold the board up to the sun, reflect back at it. So it's pretty easy to see them and count them. Another way of monitoring, when you open your hive up and you're pulling it apart, I don't use queen excluders. So you get a lot of brace comb. Between the brace comb will be drones. And as you take the box off to do an inspection, you'll find the mites on the drones, and it gives you an idea. If you find nothing in those brace comb, you know you're pretty good. If you find more than 4 or 5, you know you've got troubles and start looking elsewhere. We produce good crops because this is the type of pollen you get. You get a mixture of pollen. You can see these bees were dark. My bees are all yellow now. So this is what I was having as my mongrels at that stage. You can see they packed in the pollen quite well. We have pollen all year round, really, because a lot of the dark stuff there, the orangey stuff, that will be gorse pollen. Once you've got different varieties of pollen in there, the bees do really well. Good nutrition is the key to beekeeping. But anyway, despite varroa, and when you get on top of it, beekeeping can still be enjoyable.
Thank you, Frank. Just a question. Based on your experience, where do you think we are at with varroa in Australia? I personally think that it's probably already in Victoria, even though nobody has found it yet, just because it's so hard to find at the start of the infection.
It'll be 2 to 3 years, probably. And in the third year, you'll start really seeing it. What Dennis Anderson, who's one of your scientists, he named a structure. He found looking in New Guinea, mites would move down and then they went through a spreading phase. And basically when they went from hive to hive and they didn't breed up until most of the hives were already infected. So they go through the spreading phase to start with, and then they start breeding up, and it can take you 18 months to breed up before you start really seeing the results.
Thank you, Frank. Do you think we're going to be wanting to knock off feral hives in managing varroa? Is that something that you might think will happen in Australia?
I've advised some of the commercial beekeepers to do that. The reason being that if they leave their hives in that area during your winter flow, we noticed in the first 3 years that we had winter honey crops, and that was our bees going out robbing ferals as they were dying and bringing back more mites. Our hives used to start dying June, because when they started robbing in June, which is the middle of our winter or just the beginning of the cold period, and now they die in May or even April. It depends on who's around you and who's not treating properly. What happens, of course, is when the ferals start dying, and it takes 3 years for them to die because they'll only get mites in most cases from drones going in there. When a hive swarms, I've observed, and we've seen this in shop displays and whatnot, that, the bees are all back again. And I went and had a look and they were absolutely full of drones. And 2 days, 3 days after that, the queen had mated and then they're all gone again. And so when they come in like that, they actually bring in lots of drones, they bring in mites, and that's where the hive gets its mites from. If the feral hives are not swarming every year, then it's going to take a while for some of them to break down. Even though they were close to commercial hives, only when they swarm that they'll break down, and then 6 to 12 months later, they're dead.
Thank you, Frank. I'm just interested to know, do you think the nefarious actions of your other beekeepers may have spread varroa quicker than it should have?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of sabotage. The Manuka Wars, even after that, up in that area, the middle of the North Island area, somebody dumped some hives into reserve. One of our beekeepers driving past going up to Taupo said, that's a stupid place to put them. He came back 2 days later and the smoke was coming off 50 of them. They'd been burnt. So there was a fair bit of wars going on, people pinching hives, people taking honey, people doing all sorts of things. But yeah, it was definitely moved much quicker than it should have gone.
But how was the effect of the arrival of, say, deformed wing virus to the islands affect?
In 2007, I think it was, we started importing carniole and sealand, and on the third shipment, I think it was, they got deformed wing virus, and it was noticed immediately when they bred the queens and distributed the queens. That had an exceptional thing. Now, the viruses actually kills the hive. As I said, you can have up to 41,000 mites in a hive, and the hive, if you treat it, will recover. When you get deformed wing virus, when you get over 20%, which is 60 mites out of 300 bees, when you do an alcohol wash, that hive is walking dead. It just doesn't know it yet. You can control the mites, but during the winter, the virus upsets the bees. They don't thermoregulate well, and generally they die during the winter. We could recover before deformed virus. Even if you're a bit late treating, the bees would recover because we've got, like you, so there's something going on all the winters, a little dribble coming in, so the bees can recover. But once they get the virus and the virus gets too high, the bees don't really recover.
Thanks, Frank, and let's hope that varroa goes slowly and we've got more time in the future to have more presentations like this. So on behalf of everyone, Frank here tonight, and also people who are going to see the video on YouTube, thank you very much.